Tonight, Herman Cain fights back. He denies making any sexual advances and calls one accuser a troubled woman.
My first response in my mind and reaction was, I don't even know who this woman is.
Bill Whitaker and Jan Crawford are covering. They lost their lives in Afghanistan. Now the Air Force is investigating what happened to their remains. David Martin has the story. At Independence Hall, we asked some of the most successful people in America the toughest question. How do you create jobs in this country?
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Herman Cain, the front-runner for the Republican presidential nomination, forcefully confronted charges of sexual harassment late today. He called one accuser a troubled woman, and he said that he is being slandered in a firestorm that he blames on Democrats and the media. In the last week, 4 women have accused Cain of inappropriate sexual behavior. 3 of them had been anonymous, but late today, one of them revealed her name to CBS News. Cain confronted all the allegations in a late news conference in Arizona. We have 2 reports tonight. First, Bill Whitaker in Phoenix. Bill?
Scott, in a week in which attempts to put this scandal behind him seemingly have failed, Herman Cain today attacked it head-on with a full-throated denial and denunciation of his accusers.
I will vigorously defend my reputation because I will not allow false accusations to compromise or in any way shed badly on my character and my integrity. I will repeat, I have never acted inappropriately with anyone, period.
Republican presidential candidate Herman Cain was forced to respond to allegations made by Sharon Bialik yesterday that Mr. Cain had once groped her in a car when she went to see him for a job.
He suddenly reached over and he put his hand on my leg, under my skirt, and reached for my genitals. He also grabbed my head and brought it towards his crotch.
Today, Herman Cain accused Bialik of making false charges. In fact, he says he didn't even know her.
I tried to remember if I recognized her, and I didn't. I tried to remember if I remembered that name, and I didn't. The charges and the accusations I absolutely reject. They simply didn't happen.
Cain's response to the scandal morphed over the week, from outright denial to recollection of an agreement with one of his accusers. But today, his denial of wrongdoing was adamant, saying none of this would force him from the race.
We are not going to allow Washington or politics to deny me the opportunity to represent this great nation. And as far as these accusations causing me to back off and maybe withdraw from this presidential primary race, ain't gonna happen.
Now, clearly, this was an exercise in damage control, but it seems there's little damage to control. Scott, according to recent polls, Herman Cain remains at or near the top of the Republican race in surveys this week.
Bill, thanks very much. The Cain campaign raised questions today about Sharon Bialik, the woman who made her accusation yesterday. Cain called her troubled, and his campaign called her character into question. Jan Crawford has that part of the story.
After accusing Herman Cain of making an aggressive sexual advance,
I was very, very surprised and very shocked.
Sharon Bialik today went even more public, appearing on all 3 networks to repeat allegations that Cain groped her in 1997 after she asked him for help finding a job.
I don't despise the man. I actually did it because I wanted to help him. I wanted to give him a platform to come clean, to tell the truth.
Herman Cain says he is telling the truth, and today his campaign went even further, attacking her credibility in an email blast to reporters with the question, who is Sharon Bialik? The fact is, the email said, that Ms. Bialek has had a long and troubled history, from the courts to personal finances, which may help explain why she has come forward 14 years after an alleged incident with Mr. Kane, powered by celebrity attorney and long-term Democrat donor Gloria Allred. The campaign email lists a half-dozen lawsuits against Bialek, as well as 2 bankruptcy filings and a paternity suit involving her now 13-year-old son. CBS News has confirmed Bialek filed for bankruptcy in 1991 and again 10 years later. She also has been sued at least 6 times for amounts under $5,000 over such issues as non-payment of rent. She was evicted once. As for the paternity suit, she won and got child support. Bialek, a 50-year-old single mother who now lives in the Chicago area, says she is not seeking money.
I have so much to lose, but really nothing to gain.
Now, Republican strategists say they can't remember a presidential campaign openly attacking the credibility of an accuser. Scott, those responses typically are done by surrogates or just whispered to reporters.
Jan, thank you very much. Now about the accuser who identified herself today to CBS News. She is 55-year-old Karen Kraushauer. She told us that she wants to hold a news conference with all of Kane's accusers. And she told us, quote, "The whole situation is so volatile right now, I just don't want to say any more." Kane said today that all he remembered about Karen Kraushauer's harassment accusation is that he had once compared her height to his wife's height. Kane and the rest of the Republican presidential candidates will debate national security and foreign policy issues Saturday evening at 8 Eastern Time here on CBS. We got word today that there are serious questions about how the remains of fallen American troops have been handled once they were returned home. David Martin at the Pentagon is looking into this.
There was gross mismanagement in the solemn, gut-wrenching return of the fallen from Iraq and Afghanistan. That, according to this letter to President Obama from the Office of Special Counsel, which investigates whistleblower complaints. Carolyn Lerner heads the office.
Well, we found a pattern of misconduct. They knew about these problems about 2.5 years ago and only recently took action to correct them.
The grisly fact is that many remains arrive at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware in pieces. And the investigation found 2 cases in which body parts of a soldier and an Air Force pilot were either lost or misplaced. In another case, an arm bone was sawed off in order to fit a Marine killed by a roadside bomb into his dress uniform for burial. It happened between 2008 and 2010 when some 4,000 remains passed through Dover.
This was difficult work, and while their performance did not meet standards, this was not a deliberate act.
But Air Force Chief of Staff Norton Schwartz acknowledged the families weren't told until this past weekend.
We asked them more than once why they wouldn't go to the families and let them know what had happened. Their response was very clear. They couldn't be trusted. They might go to the press.
Colonel Robert Edmondson, the commander of the mortuary at the time, received a career-ending letter of reprimand, and 2 civilians were demoted and transferred to other jobs.
Those responsible have been treated with kid gloves. They haven't been fired. In fact, a job was created for one of them in order to keep him employed.
Lerner also says the Air Force tried to fire 2 of the whistleblowers. They have since been given their jobs back.
David, thank you very much. There is a report tonight that the legendary football coach Joe Paterno may soon be out of a job. The New York Times says that Penn State trustees are discussing how to manage his departure. The school canceled his weekly press conference today amid a growing scandal. A former assistant coach is charged with sexually abusing 8 children, some of them on the Penn State campus. Paterno reportedly told his superiors about the incidents, but did not notify the police. Attorney General Eric Holder faces tough questions about the gun-walking scandal. Here and gone, an asteroid whizzes by planet Earth. Cheryl Atkinson helped uncover the gun walking scandal in which agents of the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms let thousands of weapons cross the border so they could be traced to Mexican drug lords. Many of those guns were later used in violent crimes. Today, Cheryl tells us that Attorney General Eric Holder was grilled about the program at a Senate hearing.
I do. For the first time, Attorney General Holder made the difficult admission to Congress.
Any instance of so-called gun walking is simply unacceptable. Regrettably, this tactic was used as part of Fast and Furious.
That also means a letter Holder's office sent Congress last February denying gun walking was wrong.
What I said is it contains inaccurate information.
Well, isn't that false?
Well, false, I don't want to quibble with you, but false, I think, implies people making a decision to deceive.
Holder defended his own actions.
I took action. I asked the department's inspector general to investigate this matter.
But Republicans hammered away, asking about Border Patrol agent Brian Terry, who was murdered last December by Mexican drug cartel members. 2 assault rifles from ATF's gun-walking operation Fast and Furious were found at the scene.
Would you like to apologize today for this program that went so wrong, that took the life of a United States law enforcement agent?
I certainly regret what happened to Agent Brian Terry. It is not fair, however, to assume that the mistakes that happened in Fast and Furious directly led to the death of Agent Terry.
Today, Terry's father had a harsh assessment saying everyone responsible should be prosecuted.
And I think they should be prosecuted for not just my son, for all the people they murdered in Mexico.
Democrats repeatedly raised a separate gun-walking operation started under President Bush, which we first reported on last March. Attorney General Holder said he didn't know much about that either, but hopes his inspector general gets to the bottom of it all.
Thanks, Cheryl. Turns out NASA had it right. They said a large asteroid would miss the Earth, and it did. It's about the size of an aircraft carrier, and scientists estimate it got within 202,000 miles of Earth as it zoomed by earlier this evening. A panel of very bright and very successful Americans have some thoughts about getting the country back on track when we come back.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is sponsored by Levemir FlexPen. Ask your doctor about the benefits of Levemir FlexPen today.
America was born 235 years ago, and it is still a work in progress. With most Americans unhappy about the direction of the country, we decided to go back to where it all began, Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Where the Founding Fathers met, we gathered some of the wisest people of our time to ask them how they would move the country forward. Joining us in Independence Hall were Mary Frances Berry, constitutional historian, professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and former chairperson of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights; Mick Cornett, mayor of Oklahoma City and president of the Republican Mayors Association; Arturo Vargas, the executive director of the National Association of Latino elected and appointed officials; Matthew Siegel, co-founder of OurTime.org, an organization focused on empowering youth; Eileen McDonald, president and CEO of the Penn Mutual Life Insurance Company; Dr. Joe Greer, assistant dean and professor of medicine at Florida International University; John Bogle, the founder of the Vanguard Group, the world's largest mutual fund company; and Michelle Rhee, CEO of Students First and the former chancellor of the Washington, D.C. Public Schools.
We've lost the American competitive spirit. If you look at how we're raising our kids today and the culture that we are creating, we are spending so much time trying to make children feel good about themselves that we've lost sight of putting the time in that it takes to actually make them good at something. So, I have 2 little girls. They play soccer. They suck at soccer. They really do. But if you were to go into their rooms today, you would see trophies and medals and ribbons and plaques. You would think just based on that I'm raising the next Mia Hamm. And I feel like part of that is actually not doing a good service to our children because we're not teaching them that in order to be great at something, you have to put the time in. You have to put the effort in. It's about discipline. It's about work ethic.
Frankly, it's personal accountability. It's the student, it's the teachers, it's the parents all working together. We can throw money at education, but it falls short when it gets to the home if that education isn't reinforced and continued. We know that kids at school learn to read from their teachers, but they learn to love reading from their parents.
I fully agree that a lot of this does come back to the family. However, the cost of higher education has outpaced the cost of living exponentially the last several years. When you graduate $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in debt, which so many of my friends have, you are compelled to take the highest paying job possible. So where do they go? They go to Wall Street. And that is sucking entrepreneurship dry in this country.
Jack, you have created more wealth than just about anybody in this country. How do you create jobs today?
The most popular engineering course in the major colleges in America is not civil engineering, it's not electrical engineering, it's not mechanical engineering, it's not aeronautical engineering, it's financial engineering, which is an attempt to beat the other guy at a game in which you ultimately together lose. That makes no sense.
Big corporations in this country at this moment are sitting on $1 trillion in cash that they could invest in jobs and plant and equipment, but they're not doing it.
Yeah, there's no customers. I mean, you're not going to expand your inventory if you can't sell the product, and you're not going to hire people if you can't get people to employ those services.
Mick, your city has the lowest unemployment rate of any major city in America.
That's correct.
How do you create jobs in this country, in the rest of the country?
Well, from a long-term perspective, I think the comments about education are right on. But from a shorter-term perspective, nationally, we've got to understand that government has gotten too big. We've taken on the welfare of all mankind as a practical objective. And it's just not. Capitalism requires winners and losers, and we get uncomfortable with the losers.
I just want to make sure that what's not lost in this conversation is the fact that the crisis, the economic crisis, has not affected every community equally. Unemployment rate is the highest among Latinos. The educational system is affecting Latinos more than any other population because of our youthfulness. California, for example, the largest state in the union, 51% of the entire population under 18 is Hispanic. If we do not invest in those children today, that state cannot succeed tomorrow.
We need to do something now about people who don't have jobs now. Employers say that they have millions of jobs and that there's a skills mismatch and our people cannot fill those jobs. I am saying that some of those employers ought to get up off the cash they have and hire some people and train them on the job for some of those jobs. And we need to do something now.
Tell me one thing that is working well, one thing that gives you hope.
One thing that gives me hope is the incredibly wonderful quality of this next generation. They are brilliant. They seem to be willing to put the interest of the community before their personal interest. Now, my generation, we've messed things up, and we have this new generation coming along, and I am absolutely confident that they're good enough to fix it.
And tomorrow, more of what's working in America. That's the CBS Evening News for tonight. For all of us at CBS News all around the world, good night.